The biggest man grabbed Victoria Sterling by the wrist, slammed her contract onto the table, and pressed a pen into her hand. "Sign it," he said. "Right now, or by Monday morning, you won't have a company left to protect." The entire restaurant went silent. Mothers pulled their children closer. A waitress backed into the kitchen and didn't come back out. The manager turned away from the window and stared at the wall, like a man who had decided very deliberately that he was blind. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. And then from a corner booth in the back of the room, a chair scraped against the floor. Slow, deliberate, loud enough to cut through the silence like a knife. A man stood up, no badge, no uniform, just grease-stained work clothes, a cup of coffee going cold, and a 7-year-old daughter watching him from across the table with wide, unblinking eyes. He wasn't big, he wasn't loud, he didn't look like a hero. He looked like a man who had already decided a long time ago that he would never again sit still while the world held its breath, and waited for someone else to act. He started walking, and nothing in that restaurant, nothing in any of their lives would ever be the same again. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story reaches. And if no one's told you to subscribe yet, I'm telling you now, stay with me. This one goes deep. Ethan Brooks had been awake since 4:30 that morning, not because of an alarm. He hadn't needed an alarm in almost 4 years. His body just knew. It woke him up the same way it always did, quietly, without drama, like everything else in his life, and he lay there in the dark for exactly 3 minutes, staring at the ceiling, doing what he always did in those first few moments before the day came crashing in. He thought about Claire. Not the way he used to, back in the beginning. Back then the thoughts were jagged, sharp enough to draw blood, and some mornings he couldn't even make it out of bed. Now it was different, softer somehow. He'd think about her laugh, the way she used to steal the covers and never once apologize for it. The way she said Lily's name with that little extra breath at the end, like the word itself was something precious she didn't want to let go of too fast. Lily. The second he heard the small feet hit the floor down the hall, Ethan was already up. That was the deal he'd made with himself. That was the deal he'd made with her, with Claire, the night he sat alone in a hospital corridor at 2 in the morning while a doctor told him words he would never be able to eat and hear. He'd made her a promise, not out loud, but the kind that goes bone deep, the kind you carry in your chest every single day, like a stone you chose to pick up and decided you'd never put down. She won't grow up without somebody in her corner. Not on my watch, Daddy. Lily appeared in the doorway of his bedroom, her dark hair a spectacular disaster, her pajamas twisted sideways, one sock on and one sock mysteriously gone. She was holding her stuffed rabbit, Captain Flops, a battered gray creature that had lost one eye sometime around her 5th birthday and never recovered, and she was looking at him with that expression she had, the one that made everything else fall away. "Morning, Bug," Ethan said. His voice was rough, still half asleep, but he was smiling. He was always smiling for her. "You look like you lost a fight with your pillow." "I won," she said, completely serious. "The pillow is on the floor." He laughed. "A real one. The kind that came from somewhere genuine. My mistake. Come here." She crossed the room and climbed up onto the bed the way she'd been doing since she was big enough to pull herself up with total confidence, no hesitation, like she owned every inch of the space, and she pressed herself against his side and yawned so hard her whole body shook. "Today's the concert," she announced. "I know it is. I have a solo, I know you do. 12 bars of hot cross buns on the recorder. I have been mentally prepared for this moment for 6 weeks." Lily pulled back and looked at him with deeply offended dignity. "It's not just hot cross buns, Daddy. It's a medley." "A medley. Absolutely. I apologize." She considered him for a moment, decided he was sufficiently chastised, and settled back against him. "Can we go to Rosie's before?" "I want the pancakes with the strawberries." "Yeah," he said. "We can go to Rosie's." Rosie's family kitchen had been on Colfax Avenue for 31 years. It was the kind of place that had the same waitress for 2 decades, the kind where they still wrote the specialments on a chalkboard in actual chalk, the kind where you could order a coffee and sit for an hour without anybody rushing you. Ethan had been coming here since before Lily was born. He and Claire used to come here on Sunday mornings, splitting the Denver omelet, arguing pleasantly about whether hash browns or home fries were the superior potato product. Claire was a home fries woman. Ethan had always been hash brown. It was, he had decided, the one true difference between them that had never been resolved. He still ordered hash browns. He wasn't sure if that was loyalty or stubbornness. Maybe both. They arrived at 11:40, which gave them a solid 90 minutes before Lily needed to be at the school auditorium. The lunch crowd was just beginning to fill in, a couple of booths occupied. Two older men at the counter with coffee and newspapers, a young family near the window with a toddler who was industriously destroying a packet of crackers. The kind of crowd that felt like background noise, like the world going about its business. Maria, who had been their regular waitress for the better part of 3 years, waved them over to their usual booth near the back, the one with the slightly wobbly table leg that Ethan had been meaning to mention and never quite got around to. "There she is," Maria said, crouching down to Lily's level. "The star of the show. You ready for tonight?" Lily straightened up about 2 full inches. "I have a solo, I heard. Your dad's been telling me for weeks." "I have not," Ethan said, sliding into the booth. "Last Tuesday, Maria, Lily has a recorder solo. 2 Saturdays ago, Maria, did I mention the concert's coming up? Last Thursday, and I'm quoting here." "I'll have coffee," Ethan said, "and a little less accuracy, please." Maria laughed and disappeared toward the counter. Lily opened her children's menu and began the extremely serious business of selecting between the strawberry pancakes and the strawberry pancakes, which, as far as Ethan could tell, were the same item listed twice under different names. He watched her. He did that a lot, just watched her. The way she traced her finger down the laminated menu, the way her lips moved a little when she read, the way her brow furrowed with the gravity of her decision. She looked like Claire around the eyes. She had Ethan's jawline and his stubbornness, and, unfortunately for everyone, his absolute inability to admit when he was wrong. But those eyes, dark and deep and always paying attention. She was paying attention now. Ethan's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at it. "Ron, work? Hey man, covering you tomorrow morning?" Dave called out sick. He stared at the message. Tomorrow was supposed to be his first day off in 11 days. He'd been counting, not complaining he didn't do that, didn't see the point, but counting quietly, the way you count down to something you've been saving up for. He typed back, "Yeah, what time?" 5 a.m. "It's sorry, man. It's fine," he typed. And then he put the phone face down on the table and picked up his coffee cup, because it was fine, and because there was no version of his life right now where it was anything other than fine, and dwelling on it didn't do anybody any good. He was good at that. Putting things face down. He hadn't started out as a bus mechanic. People sometimes looked at him, big hands, calloused, always a faint ghost of grease under the fingernails no matter how hard he scrubbed, and they made assumptions about what kind of man he was. Sometimes those assumptions were flattering. Sometimes they weren't. Ethan had stopped caring about assumptions around the same time he stopped sleeping through the night, which was to say a very long time ago. He'd been a combat medic. 2 deployments, 11 years total service, the kind of work that didn't leave you when you came home. The kind where you learned to keep your hands steady when everything else was falling apart. Where you learned that panic was a luxury nobody could afford. That clear thinking under pressure was the only currency that mattered. That sometimes the difference between someone living and someone dying was nothing more than one for deciding to act when everyone else was standing still. He'd come home from his second deployment to a wife who was 6 months pregnant, and a VA system that was 3 months backlogged, and a nightmare situation that had taken about 18 months and a lot of stubbornness to get mostly under control. He'd transitioned into civilian work because the structure suited him, still working with hands. He then, still problem solving, still part of something bigger. Bus mechanic wasn't glamorous. But Ethan had never been interested in glamour. He'd been interested in Claire. He'd been interested in being the kind of husband she deserved, and the kind of father his kid would be proud of. 2 out of 3 wasn't bad, he told himself sometimes. On the harder nights. He told himself a lot of things on the harder nights. "Daddy," he looked up. Lily was watching him with those eyes. "You were doing the face," she said. "What face?" "The thinking about mommy face." He opened his mouth, closed it. She was 7 years old, and she could read him like a large print book, and he wasn't sure whether that was something to be proud of or something to be quietly terrified by. "I was thinking about work," he said. Lily tilted her head, unimpressed. "You don't have to lie to me, Daddy. I think about her too." Ethan put down his coffee cup. There were moments with Lily, not often, but sometimes, where she said something so direct, so completely without artifice or performance, that it stopped him cold. Where he'd look at this small human being he was responsible for and think, "How are you already this wise? Where did you come from? How is it possible that you are 7 years old, and you already understand things that took me 40 years to figure out?" "Yeah," he said quietly. "I know you do, Bug. It's okay to be sad," Lily said. "Ms. Patterson says feelings are like weather. They're not good or bad. They just are. Ms. Patterson is a smart woman. She lets us have an extra 5 minutes at recess when we have a hard feeling. I've been using it mostly for the monkey bars." Ethan laughed. And this time it came up from somewhere deep, somewhere that had been genuinely loosened. "That is a completely valid use of emotional processing time." Maria arrived with the pancakes. Lily immediately began the architectural project of stacking her strawberries in a precise pyramid. Her earlier moment of wisdom, apparently complete, filed away, done. Ethan watched her and felt, as he did sometimes, the specific and almost unbearable weight of loving someone that much. It sat on his chest differently than grief did. Grief was heavy and cold. This was heavy and warm, but both of them pressed down. He wouldn't trade it. Not for anything. Not for an easier life. Not for sleeping in. Not for any of the things he'd quietly given up over the last 4 years. He wouldn't trade a single ounce of this weight. He reached across the table and straightened the fork she'd knocked sideways. And she didn't even look up from her strawberry pyramid. And somehow that small ordinary moment, that tiny, completely unremarkable gesture was everything. The restaurant filled up around them. The ambient noise rose and settled into that familiar weekend rhythm. Silverware and conversation. A baby laughing 3 booths over. The cook calling out an order. Someone's phone playing a country song before it got silenced. Ethan had always liked that sound. The sound of ordinary life going on. There was something stabilizing about it. Something that said, things are okay. People are eating lunch. The world is moving. He needed that sometimes. He ordered the hash browns. He always ordered the hash browns. They were halfway through lunch when the door opened. Ethan didn't look up right away. Why would he? Doors opened all the time. People came in for lunch. That was how restaurants worked. But something made him look up. Maybe it was the way the ambient noise shifted, not stopped, but shifted, like a held breath, or maybe it was some animal instinct developed over 2 deployments that had never fully gone off duty, the part of his brain that was always scanning the room, whether he asked it to or not. 3 men walked in. They were well dressed. That was the first thing. Not restaurant casual like most of the lunch crowd, but suited. Pressed the kind of clothes that said these men operated in rooms where money was made rather than spent. They were all somewhere in their 40s or early 50s, all carrying themselves with the particular kind of posture that goes with being the most important person in every room they've ever walked into. They didn't stop at the hostess stand. They didn't look at menus. They walked directly through this restaurant with a certainty of destination that immediately told Ethan they already know where they're going. His eyes followed them without him deciding to. They stopped at a table near the front window. A woman was sitting there alone. She'd been there when Ethan and Lily came in. He'd noticed her the way he noticed most things, automatically, without emphasis. Early 40s, dark blazer, working through what looked like a salad and a stack of papers. The contained efficient energy of someone with places to be and things to accomplish. She looked up when the 3 men arrived. Something happened in her expression. Something fast and involuntary there, and gone in less than a second, the way a wince moves across a face before the person can stop it. Ethan had spent years reading people's faces in high-stress situations. He knew what involuntary fear looked like. She knew these men, and she did not want them here. "Daddy," Lily said, "you have the other face now." "What other face?" "The army face," she said it, matter-of-factly, not alarmed, just reporting information. She'd seen it before, apparently. Ethan pulled his attention back to his daughter. "Sorry, Bug. Tell me more about this medley. She launched to a detailed technical description of the piece she was performing, complete with hand gestures indicating the specific dramatic moments she planned to emphasize on the recorder. Ethan listened, he responded. He asked the right questions at the right moments. But part of his attention, the part that had never fully come home from overseas, remained on the table near the front window. He couldn't hear what was being said. The restaurant was too loud, and the table was too far. But he didn't need to hear, he could see. He could see the way the three men had positioned themselves. Two on one side, blocking her from the restaurant, one on the other, blocking her from the wall. He could see the way they'd seated themselves, without being invited. He could see the posture of the one who seemed to be doing the talking, leaning forward slightly, elbows on the table, the particular forward tilt of a man who is making a point he expects to be received as non-negotiable. And he could see the woman. He could see the way she'd straightened, not in confidence, but in bracing. The difference was visible if you knew what to look for. Confidence opens up, bracing closes in. She was closed in. Her jaw was tight. Her shoulders were carrying about 3 inches of compressed tension, and her hands, which had been resting openly on the table, were now flat against the surface, pressed down, grounding herself. She was being pushed. She was being pushed hard. And she was holding on, but she wasn't happy about it. And the three men seemed fully aware of that, and seemed, if anything, to find it satisfying. Around the restaurant, other people were noticing. Ethan could see that too. The older men at the counter had gone very still over their newspapers. The family by the window had stopped eating. Maria had appeared from the kitchen doorway, looked toward the front table, and retreated without saying anything. The manager, a heavyset man named Dave who Ethan recognized from previous visits, was standing near the register doing a remarkable impression of someone who didn't see anything at all. Nobody was going to do anything. Ethan knew that feeling. He recognized it from overseas, from training, from every scenario where a room full of people all waited for somebody else to move first. It wasn't cowardice, not exactly. It was something more human than that. The weight of uncertainty. The very reasonable question of, who am I to get involved? What if I make it worse? What if they turn on me? He understood it. He just happened to be constitutionally incapable of sittings. Still, while it was happening, "Daddy," Lily's voice was quiet, lower than usual. He looked at her. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking toward the front of the restaurant over his shoulder. At the table near the window, and her expression had that particular quality that 7-year-olds get when they understand something. They don't have the words forwards, yet. "Why is everyone pretending not to see?" she asked. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't rhetorical. It was a genuine question, direct and honest and completely unfiltered, the way children ask the questions that adults have learned to swallow. Ethan was quiet for a moment. He thought about the last 3 times he'd wished someone had stepped forward. He thought about a waiting room at the VA, and a school meeting where a teacher said something about Lily that wasn't right, and a night 4 years ago in a hospital corridor when he'd sat completely alone and needed, more than he'd ever needed anything, for someone to simply come and stand beside him. Nobody had, not because people were cruel, but because everyone was waiting for someone else to go first. He looked at his daughter. He thought, she's watching. She's watching everything. She is going to remember this. She is going to remember what her father did when he had every reason to stay seated. He thought, what do I want her to remember? He put down his fork. He pushed back his chair. And Ethan Brooks, grease-stained mechanic, widowed father, former combat medic, a man with 11 days of work, without a day off, and a phone buzzing in his pocket, and a daughter about to perform her first recorder solo in approximately 90 minutes, stood up. He didn't make a speech. He didn't look around for support or approval or backup. He didn't hesitate, calculate, or second-guess. He just stood up and began to walk. Behind him, Lily watched her father cross the restaurant. She picked up Captain Flops and held him a little tighter. And she waited. Ethan had taken maybe 6 steps before the first man noticed him. Not the big one, the one who'd grabbed Victoria's wrist. That one still had his eyes on her. Still had his hand pressing the pen down, like he was afraid she'd disappear if he let go. It was the second one. The one standing to the left with his jacket open and his arms crossed, who turned his head and saw Ethan coming. He didn't say anything right away. He just watched. The way a dog watches something it hasn't decided is a threat yet. Ethan kept walking. He wasn't moving fast. That was the thing people would remember later. Not that he charged. Not that he stormed across the room. He walked the way he'd walked into a lot of situations over the years. Steady, even. Like he had all the time in the world and had already decided how this was going to go. The second man uncrossed his arms. "Help you with something?" he said. His voice was casual, almost friendly, the kind of casual that is a test. Ethan stopped about 4 feet from the table. Close enough to be in the conversation. Far enough to have options. "Just checking in," Ethan said. The word checking landed in the air between them and sat there. The second man's eyes moved over Ethan once the work clothes, the hands, the face, and whatever calculation he ran came back with an answer he liked, because the corner of his mouth moved. "This is a private conversation," the second man said. "You might want to head back to your table." "I might," Ethan said. He didn't move. Now the big one looked up, the one who'd grabbed Victoria's wrist. He was broader across the shoulders than the other two, with the kind of neck that came from either a gym or genetics. And he had the flat, patient eyes of a man who was very accustomed to people eventually doing what he wanted. He looked at Ethan, the way you look at a minor inconvenience. A delay, something to be cleared away. "Sir," he said, and the word was wrapped in something that was almost polite, almost reasonable, almost the kind of tone you'd use with a child who'd wandered into the wrong room. "We're in the middle of something. I'm going to ask you to respect that." "I can see that," Ethan said. "I can also see that this woman looks like she'd rather be somewhere else." Victoria Sterling had not moved, had not spoken. Her eyes had gone to Ethan the second he'd stopped at the table, and she was watching him with an expression he couldn't fully read, part fear, part something else. Something that might have been the very early, very fragile beginning of hope, the kind of hope a person is almost afraid to feel, because they've already calculated the odds, and they don't love the math. The big man released the pen, slowly. He straightened up in his seat, and the shift in posture was deliberate, a territorial thing, a physical language that said, "I am larger than you. I am more dangerous than you. Think carefully about the next thing you do." "She's fine," the big man said. "We're colleagues. Old friends, actually. Just catching up." "Is that right?" It wasn't a question. Ethan looked at Victoria directly. "You doing okay, ma'am?" She opened her mouth. The third man, who had been standing slightly behind the table, a quiet one, the kind of quiet that Ethan's instincts immediately ranked as the most dangerous, stepped forwards and said, very softly, "She's fine." And something in that softness, that particular controlled softness, made Ethan's jaw tighten. He'd met men like that overseas, the soft-voiced ones, the ones who didn't need to raise their voice because they'd already done the math, and they knew exactly how many options you didn't have. He was not going to step back. "I wasn't asking you," Ethan said. He kept his eyes on Victoria. "Ma'am, do you want these men to leave?" The table went completely still. The entire restaurant, which had been pretending to be a restaurant. For the last several minutes, pretending very hard, with forks and coffee cups, and conversations that weren't conversations, stopped pretending. The ambient noise didn't disappear exactly, but it dropped, receded, pulled back the way a tide pulls back right before something significant happens. Victoria Sterling looked at Ethan Brooks for 2 full seconds. Her jaw was still tight. Her hands were still flat against the table. But something moved behind her eyes. Something that looked like a decision being made. A calculation finishing. A woman who had been holding a positioner alone for a long time, and was now being asked, by a complete stranger in a grease-stained shirt, whether she wanted backup. "Yes," she said, quiet and clear, "I would like them to leave." The big man let out a short breath through his nose. Not quite loud. More like the sound of a man recalibrating. "Victoria," he said. And now the almost politeness was gone, the tone shifting to something underneath it, something harder and more direct. "Don't do this. You know what's at stake here. You know exactly what we can do if you push this past today." "I know what you think you can do," Victoria said. Her voice didn't shake. Ethan noticed that. She was afraid he could see the fear in every line of her body, but her voice didn't shake, and he filed that away. This was a woman who had learned to separate her voice from her fear. That took practice. That took a specific kind of experience. What's at stake, the second man said, leaning forward now, is every partnership you've built for the last 8 years. Every relationship, every contract, one phone call, Victoria. One. And by the time the markets open Monday, your credibility in this industry is mites. Hey, Ethan's voice wasn't loud, but it was very, very direct. You want to finish that sentence? The second man turned to look at him like he'd forgotten Ethan was there. Like he was genuinely surprised that this person was still standing at his table. I'm sorry, the second man said, with a precision that had nothing to do with apology. Who exactly are you? I'm the guy who's going to stand here until you leave, Ethan said. That's who I am. For a moment, nobody said anything. Then the big man stood up. He was taller than Ethan had expected. 6'2", maybe 6'3", with the kind of deliberate physical presence that was in itself a form of communication. He straightened his jacket, adjusted his cuffs, and looked at Ethan with the calm of a man who had never once in his adult life lost a stare down and was not planning to start today. You have no idea what you're walking into, he said. Probably not, Ethan agreed. Doesn't change anything. The big man stared at him. Ethan stared back. This was the moment. Ethan knew it, and the big man knew it, and everyone in the restaurant who was watching. And they were all watching now, every single one of them, with varying levels of pretending not to felt it. This was the moment that decided the shape of everything that came after. Whether it escalated or deflated, whether it got ugly or got resolved, whether one man's decision to stand up was going to mean anything at all, or whether it was going to be crushed under the simple physical mathematics of 3 against 1. The big man took one step forward. And then something happened that Ethan hadn't calculated for. A chair scraped back 3 booths away, not his chair, someone else's. Ethan didn't turn around, but he heard it. Heard the deliberate sound of it, the weight of it, and something in his chest did something he hadn't expected. Everything okay over here? Said a voice behind him. Deep, steady, older. Ethan still didn't turn around, but in his peripheral vision, he caught the reaction on the big man's face, caught the almost imperceptible shift, the micro-adjustment of someone recalculating, and that told him enough. Whoever had stood up behind him was not small. The big man's eyes moved from Ethan to the new arrival and back to Ethan. This doesn't concern you, the big man said. And this time, for the first time, there was something different in the words. Not fear, not retreat, but a crack, a hairline fracture in the absolute certainty. I'm making it concern me, the voice behind Ethan said. And then another sound, another chair. Different part of the restaurant, this time closer to the window. Ethan's heart was doing something strange, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Something that started in the sternum and moved outward, like heat. He heard a woman's voice, somewhere to his right. I'm a nurse. Is anyone here hurt? He heard the shuffle of another person standing. Then another. The third man, the soft-voiced, dangerous one, turned his head slowly, scanning the restaurant, doing his own calculation. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were moving fast. The second man looked at the big man. The big man looked at the growing number of people who were no longer sitting down, no longer pretending, no longer waiting for someone else to go first. Something shifted in the room. Not all at once. It wasn't cinematic, wasn't instantaneous. It was more like a tide coming in. Slow at first, then suddenly everywhere. The invisible weight that had been pressing everyone into their seats, the weight of doubt, of uncertainty, of not wanting to be the one lifted. And when it lifted, people moved. A man who'd been sitting with his wife at the counter set down his coffee mug and stood up without saying a word. A woman in scrubs crossed her arms and planted herself about 2 feet from the second man's elbow. A large man in a trucker's cap came and stood beside Ethan on the left. You folks need to take this somewhere else, the trucker said. He was not asking. The second man looked at the trucker with genuine disbelief, like the world had malfunctioned. Like the social contract had just torn in a way it wasn't supposed to be capable of tearing. Do you have any idea? He started. Nope, the trucker said. Don't care either. Victoria was watching all of this from her seat. She hadn't moved. She looked like a woman who was trying very hard to process information faster than her nervous system was capable of processing it. Her eyes moved from face to face: the nurse, the man at the counter, the trucker, the woman in scrubs, and then they came back to Ethan. He finally looked at her directly, just for a second. Her eyes were wet, not crying but wet. The difference between those two things was exactly the distance between breaking down and holding on. And she was holding on by a very thin margin, and she knew it, and he could see that she knew it. He gave her one small nod. She straightened her spine a quarter of an inch. The big man was still standing, still hadn't moved, but the calculus had changed, visibly, in real time, and every person in that room could see him doing the math. 3 against 1 had been a comfortable number. 3 against 11 was a different conversation entirely. "Victoria," the big man said, and now his voice had dropped entirely, gone to something low and private that was meant only for her. "This isn't over, you understand that. Today doesn't change what we discussed. The timeline hasn't moved. And when we walk out of here, the situation is exactly what it was before this." He gestured, a controlled sweep of his hand that somehow managed to convey his opinion of every person currently standing in that restaurant. "This little performance." "It's not a performance," Victoria said. Her voice was steady. "These are people." The big man's jaw moved. Something worked behind his eyes. And then quietly, with the controlled precision of a man who was choosing to leave, and making very sure everyone understood, it was his choice, he picked up the unsigned contract from the table and buttoned his jacket. "Monday," he said. Just the one word. He walked toward the door. The second man followed. The soft-voiced third one lingered for exactly 1 moment, looking at Ethan with an expression that was too flat and too calm for comfort, and then he turned and followed the others. The door closed behind them. For 2 full seconds, the restaurant was completely silent. And then, from somewhere near the back, a single person began to clap. Slow at first, then joined. Then the whole room was making noise. Not the controlled background noise of a restaurant going about its business, but actual human sound, the kind that comes out of people when pressure releases, when held breath finally moves again, when the thing that was wrong has been made. At least for this moment, right. Ethan stood where he was and felt profoundly uncomfortable. He was not a man who knew what to do with applause. He turned around. The man who'd stood first behind him was a broad-shouldered black man in his 60s, with close-cropped silver hair, and the posture of someone who'd spent a significant portion of his life in uniform. Retired law enforcement, Ethan would have bet. The man looked at him with a quiet nod, the specific nod. That is an entire conversation between 2 people who don't need words to understand each other. Ethan nodded back. The nurse, early 40s, still in scrubs, clearly just off a shift or heading to one, was already moving toward Victoria. Professional instinct, clicking in. "Are you hurt? Did he hurt you physically?" "No," Victoria said. "No, I'm okay, She stopped, pressed her lips together. Started again. "Thank you, all of you. I don't know how to—" "You don't have to," the nurse said simply. "You doing okay?" "I'm working on it," Victoria said. And something about the honesty of that answer, not fine, not great, but working on it, made the nurse put a hand briefly on her shoulder and squeeze. Maria appeared from the kitchen doorway. She looked at the empty chairs where the 3 men had been sitting. She looked at the 20 or so people who were now slowly drifting back to their seats, the volume of the room gradually normalizing, the ordinary sounds reasserting themselves. She looked at Ethan. "You want more coffee?" she said. Ethan laughed. Short and genuine. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I really do." He turned to go back to his booth. Lily was sitting exactly where he'd left her. Captain Flops held in both hands, eyes fixed on her father. She had not eaten any more of her pancakes. The strawberry pyramid was intact. She had been watching everything, every single second of it, with those dark, serious eyes that missed nothing. Ethan slid back into the booth across from her. For a moment, neither of them said anything. "Dad," Lily said finally. "Yeah, you stood up." "I did." She considered this. She looked down at Captain Flops, then back up at her father. "Were you scared?" Ethan picked up his fork. He thought about the question, really thought about it. The way he tried to always think about her questions. Because she deserved that. Deserved a father who took her seriously enough to tell her the truth. "Yeah," he said. "A little bit." Lily nodded like this was exactly the correct answer. Like she'd been hoping he would say that. Miss Patterson says being brave doesn't mean you're not scared, she said. She says brave is when you're scared, and you do it anyway. Ethan looked at his daughter, 7 years old, dark eyes that looked like Claire's. Sitting there in her good dress, the one she'd picked out herself for the concert, with her stuffed rabbit and her untouched pancake pyramid, and her absolute unshakable confidence that her father was the right kind of man. He felt the weight again, the warm, heavy weight of it, the particular love that presses down on your chest and makes it hard to breathe, not because it hurts, but because it is so much, because it fills a space so completely that there's no room for anything else. Miss Patterson's a smart woman, he said. I know, Lily said. I keep telling you that. She picked up her fork and demolished the strawberry pyramid with the cheerful efficiency of someone for whom the architectural phase was simply a prelude to the eating phase. And Ethan drank his coffee, and the restaurant settled back into its ordinary rhythms around them. People returning to their lunches and their conversations and their ordinary Saturday afternoon lives. But across the restaurant, Victoria Sterling wasn't eating. She was sitting in her chair, both hands wrapped around a glass of water. She had touched, staring at the tabletop with the expression of a woman sorting through the debris of something. Her papers were still spread in front of her. The unsigned contract, no, the big man had taken it. The rest of her papers were there. Her salad was 3/4 full and going warm. She looked up once, across the room, found Ethan's face. He gave her the nod again. The brief one, "You're okay." You held. She held his gaze for a moment, too. Then she pressed her lips together, looked back down at her papers and picked up her pen. Not the one they'd pressed into her hand, her own. She began to write. Ethan watched for only a second before he looked away. It wasn't his business. He hadn't stood up to make it his business. He'd stood up because Lily had asked a question, and the question had reached into something in him that he hadn't been able to ignore. He looked at his daughter, who was now carefully eating around the edges of her pancakes in a spiral pattern that suggested a level of strategic planning he found both baffling and impressive. "How's it going over there?" he said. "I'm making it last," Lily said. "Smart, I know." Outside, somewhere on Colfax Avenue, a siren wailed and passed. A bus went by, the ordinary city doing its ordinary thing, completely unaware that inside one family restaurant, a room full of strangers had just decided, all at once, to stop waiting for someone else to go first. Ethan checked his watch. They still had 45 minutes before he needed to get Lily to the auditorium. She'd need to change into her concert clothes. He'd need to remember where he'd put her music folder. He was pretty sure it was in the back seat of the car, but there was a non-zero chance it was still on the kitchen table, which would require a decision tree he didn't want to navigate. Normal, ordinary, his life reassembling itself around him. And then he heard the footsteps, measured, deliberate. Coming in his direction, he looked up. Victoria Sterling was standing at the edge of his booth. She was taller than she'd looked seated. Her composure was back, not perfectly. He could still see the slight set of her jaw, the way she was holding herself a little more carefully than usual, the way a person holds themselves after something has shaken them, and they are determined not to show it. But she was together, upright, present. She looked at him for a moment without speaking. Then she looked at Lily. Lily looked back at her with open, uncomplicated curiosity. "I'm Lily," Lily said. "I know," Victoria said. "I saw you watching." Very seriously. "It was serious," Lily said. Something moved across Victoria's face, cracked open briefly and then resettled. "It was," she agreed. She looked back at Ethan. "I owe you an apology." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For putting you in that position. You didn't ask for any of that." She paused. "I also owe you a thank you, which feels completely inadequate, so I'm going to say it anyway." "Thank you. What you did," she stopped. Started again. "Most people don't do that." "Some people did," Ethan said. "Because of you." "Because of themselves," he said. "I just stood up first." She was quiet for a moment, looking at him with something he couldn't quite name. Assessment, maybe. The specific kind of looking that a person does when they are trying to understand something about another person that doesn't fit the categories they already have. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure. Why?" She said it simply, genuinely. You don't know me, you had no reason. Those men, you didn't know what they were capable of. You could have just, she gestured vaguely, at the booth, at the coffee cup, at the ordinary world of a man having lunch with his daughter. Why? Ethan was quiet for a moment. He looked at Lily, who was watching this exchange with the focused attention of someone attending a very interesting lecture. Then he looked back at Victoria. My daughter asked me a question, he said, and I didn't want to give her the wrong answer. Victoria looked at Lily again. Lily, who was sitting there holding Captain Flop's strawberry on her chin, watching them both with those dark, serious eyes. Victoria pressed her lips together. Her hand moved briefly to her collarbone. A small gesture, private. How old are you? She asked Lily. 7, Lily said. I have a concert tonight. I have a solo. A solo. Victoria almost smiled. That's a big deal. It's a medley, Lily said with great dignity. This time Victoria did smile. It was brief, and it was the kind of smile that comes out before a person can stop it, genuine and unguarded, and it changed her face entirely. Good luck with that, she said. She looked at Ethan one more time. Seemed like she wanted to say something else, was holding something back, or deciding whether to say it, or deciding how. I'm Victoria Sterling, she said finally. Like she was offering something. An opening, Ethan Brooks, he said. She nodded. Mr. Brooks, a beat, thank you. Another beat, I mean that. She turned and walked back toward her table. She picked up her jacket, folded her papers, and left several bills on the table that, Ethan suspected, were significantly more than her check had been. At the door she paused, turned back, just for a second. She looked at Lily. Lily waved. Victoria pressed her hand flat against the glass of the door, just for a moment, like she was steadying herself. Then she pushed through and was gone. Ethan watched the door settle shut. Around him the restaurant continued. Maria refilled his coffee. The man with the silver hair was paying his check at the counter. The nurse had left. The trucker was working through a piece of pie with the focus of a man who had stood up for what was right and now wanted his dessert, both of which seemed to him like perfectly reasonable things to do with a Saturday afternoon. Lily was looking at her father. Dad, she said, yeah. She was scared too, Lily said, but she held on. Ethan looked at his daughter. He thought about the way Victoria's hands had been pressed flat against the table. The way her voice hadn't shaken, even when everything else about her was shaking. The way she'd straightened her spine when he'd given her that nod. The way she'd signed something with her own pen when the moment was over. Yeah, he said quietly. She did. That's also brave, Lily said. That's also brave, he agreed. Lily returned to her pancakes. Ethan drank his coffee. The clock moved. 40 minutes to the auditorium. He was going to need to check the back seat for that music folder. Ordinary life, reassembled. Continuing. He didn't know, couldn't have known, sitting in that booth with his coffee going cold, that the woman who had just walked out the door was already making a phone call. That the call was to her assistant, and then to her head of security, and then to a private number she rarely used. That in the course of that walk to her car, she was reconstructing herself, processing, turning over what had happened, and what it meant, and who that man in the work clothes had been. He didn't know that she had seen something in him. In the way he'd walked across that restaurant, the way he'd spoken, the way he'd stood without posturing, without performance, with nothing to gain and everything to lose, that she hadn't seen in a very long time, maybe ever. He didn't know any of that. He was calculating whether he had enough cash for the check. Remembering that who was at Sean the Cusher, the music folder was in fact at the kid, and deciding that they had just enough time to go back for it if they left in the next 8 minutes. Come on, Bug, he said, pulling on his jacket. Concert time. Concert time, Lily agreed, sliding off the bench with Captain Flops tucked under one arm. He left a 20 and a 5 on the table, more than enough, the way he always did. Because Maria worked hard and the place deserved it. And he walked out of Rosie's family kitchen into the bright Saturday afternoon with his daughter's hand in his. He did not look back, he never did. The concert was 12 minutes long. Ethan knew because he timed it. Not because he was impatient. He would have sat in that folding auditorium chair for 12 hours if that was what Lily needed, but because he was the kind of man who tracked things. Time. Distance. The space between where you were and where you needed to be. Old habit, the kind that got drilled in so deep it became reflex. Lily's solo lasted 45 seconds. Those were the best 45 seconds of his entire week. She stood at the front of the small stage in her good dress, with her recorder held in both hands, and she played her part of the medley with the focused intensity of a surgeon performing a complicated procedure, her brow furrowed, her feet planted exactly shoulder-width apart, her eyes fixed on a point in the middle distance, the way her music teacher had apparently taught them. She did not look at Ethan. She had told him beforehand, very seriously, that looking at parents during a performance broke concentration, and he had agreed that concentration was important, and she had nodded, as though this settled something fundamental. He watched her the entire time. When it was over, she found him in the crowd outside the auditorium, and she walked up to him and said, "I think I was slightly sharp on the B-flat." And he said, "It was perfect." And she said, "It wasn't perfect, but it was pretty good." And he said, "It was the best thing I've heard all year." And she considered that for a moment and then said, "Okay, that's probably true." He drove her home. She fell asleep in the car before they hit the highway, still in her good dress, Captain Flops in her lap, her head tipped sideways against the window. He carried her inside without waking her, got her shoes off, pulled the blanket up, and stood in the doorway of her bedroom for a moment in the dark. Just stood there, breathing, counting things the way he did, her breaths, the seconds, the distance between this moment and every other moment that had led here. Then he went to the kitchen, poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey he almost never drank, and sat at the table in the quiet of his own house and let himself think about the day. He let himself think about the restaurant, about the 3 men, and the way the big one had looked at him, that flat, patient assessment, and about the exact moment. Ethan had understood that the man was not going to move, not through reason, not through social pressure, only through numbers. He let himself think about the sound of that first chair scraping back behind him, about the weight of standing in front of something ugly and not knowing, for those first few seconds, whether anyone else was going to stand with you. He thought about Victoria Sterling pressing her hand flat against the glass of the restaurant door. He thought about the word she hadn't said, the one she'd been holding when she looked at him that last time. He'd seen it. He knew what it looked like when somebody had more to say and was choosing not to say it yet. He drank the whiskey. He put the glass in the sink. He went to bed. He set his alarm for 4:45. He was asleep in 6 minutes. That was the thing about Ethan Brooks. He could shut down fast when he needed to. Another thing the Army had given him, for better or worse, the ability to close his eyes and go, regardless of what the day had held, because the next day was coming regardless, and you needed to be functional for it. He didn't dream about the restaurant. He dreamed about Claire, which was normal, and about a road somewhere in Afghanistan that he hadn't thought about in a while, which was also normal. And he woke up at 4:44, 1 minute before the alarm, and lay in the dark for exactly 3 minutes. And then he got up and went to work. Monday came with the specific weight that the big man's one-word warning had promised. Ethan didn't know that yet. He was under a bus at 6:15 in the morning, flashlight in his teeth, hands deep in a brake assembly that had been developing a personality problem for the better part of 2 weeks. He was not thinking about restaurants or CEOs or renewable energy mergers. He was thinking about whether the caliper was the problem or the rotor, and whether he could get the thing resolved before the bus needed to be back in rotation at 8. His phone buzzed on the floor beside him. He ignored it. It buzzed again. He ignored it again. The third time, something made him pick it up. The same animal instinct from the restaurant. The part of his brain that was always paying attention whether he asked it to. Unknown number, Denver area code. He answered it. "Is this Ethan Brooks?" The voice was a woman's. Controlled professional, not Victoria. "Depends," he said, still under the bus, because old habits. "My name is Dana Reeves. I'm the executive assistant to Victoria Sterling at Sterling Energy. Miss Sterling would like to speak with you, if you have a moment." Ethan slid out from under the bus. He sat up on the rolling board and looked at his phone. "How did she get this number?" he said, a half-second pause. The kind that means the answer is complicated. "Miss Sterling is very thorough." He almost smiled at that. Tell her I'm at work until 4. She was hoping for something sooner. Today is paused again. Today is a complicated day for Ms. Sterling. She wanted me to convey that she'd consider it a significant personal favor. Ethan thought about the big man's voice. Monday, just the one word. Tell her noon, he said. I can do 30 minutes at noon. There's a coffee place 2 blocks from the RTD yard on Alameda. She can send me the address, if she wants somewhere different. One moment, he heard very faint typing. The place on Alameda is fine, Dana said. Noon, she'll be there. He hung up, looked at the phone for a second, slid back under the bus. The caliper was definitely the problem. He had it resolved by 7:50. Victoria was already there when he arrived at noon. That told him something. He was 4 minutes early. He was always 4 minutes early. Another deeply embedded reflex, and she was seated at a corner table with a coffee she wasn't drinking and a phone she'd set face down on the table. The moment he walked in, she looked different than she had Saturday. Still composed, still precise in the way she carried herself, but something had shifted overnight in a direction he couldn't immediately name. She looked like a person who had slept the wrong amount, either too much or not enough, and had compensated with the kind of careful appearance management that requires effort to look effortless. She stood up when he came in, handshake firm, direct eye contact. Thank you for coming, she said. I know, this is your lunch hour. 30 minutes, he said, sitting down. What happened this morning? She blinked. Apparently, she'd prepared a different opening. Straight to it, she said. You said today was complicated. It's Monday, he said. Monday. What happened? He sat back down, wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. Not to drink it, to hold on to something. He recognized that move. They filed with the SEC this morning, she said. A disclosure claim, alleging financial irregularities in our Q3 reporting. Ethan didn't know enough about securities law to fully parse that, but he knew enough about power moves to understand the architecture of it. That's the phone call he mentioned. The one that would destroy your credibility. By Monday morning, she confirmed. He was precise about the timeline. He knew exactly what they were going to do, and exactly when. Saturday was the last opportunity to avoid it. The signing was supposed to happen Saturday. She paused. I didn't sign. No, Ethan said, you didn't, because you stood up. He shook his head. Because you said yes when I asked if you wanted them to leave. I gave you a door. You walked through it yourself. She looked at him for a moment, with that same expression from Saturday. The one that was trying to sort him into a category she didn't have yet. The filing it's manageable, she said. Our legal team has been on it since 6 this morning. The claims are thin. They were designed to spook investors, not to actually survive scrutiny. But the next few weeks are going to be, she stopped, pressed her lips together. It's going to be a fight. Okay, Ethan said. So why are you telling me? She was quiet for a moment. Outside a bus went by. He noticed it automatically, clocked the model, estimated the mileage, the kind of unconscious professional assessment he'd stopped being aware of years ago. I've been asking myself that since Saturday night, she said finally. Why I wanted to talk to you. Why this felt like something I needed to do before I dealt with any of the rest of it. She picked up her coffee, put it down without drinking. I think it's because you're the only person I've talked to in the last 72 hours who doesn't have anything to gain from what you did. My board is calling. My lawyers are calling. My investors are calling. My PR team. She said it without bitterness, just the flat reportorial weight of it. Everyone who's been in contact with me since Saturday has a reason, an angle, something they need from me, or something they're protecting. She paused. You didn't. I wanted to get back to my pancakes, Ethan said. She almost smiled. And yet, he agreed. She was quiet for a moment. Something was working behind her eyes. A decision in process. Can I ask you something personal? She said. You can ask. Your daughter, you're raising her alone? He nodded. How long? 4 years. She didn't ask about Claire. He'd expected her to. People usually did. The polite follow-up question, but she didn't. She just sat with that for a moment, processing it differently than most people did. What do you do? She said. For work, bus mechanic. RTD fleet. She nodded slowly. Before that, he studied her for a second. She'd done her homework. She already knew. Army, he said. Combat medic. 2 deployments. And now you fix buses and raise your daughter and work overtime, and she stopped herself. Recalibrated. I'm sorry, that came out wrong. It came out accurate, he said. She looked at him directly. Is it enough? The job. Financially. He held her gaze. Miss Sterling Victoria. Victoria. He said it once clearly. I didn't stand up in that restaurant so you'd feel obligated to me. If that's where this is going. It's not, she said immediately. I'm not offering you charity. I want to be very clear about that. Something sharpened in her expression. Something that looked like the version of her that ran a billion-dollar company. I'm asking because I'm trying to understand something, and I need to understand it correctly before I say what I actually came here to say. He waited. I have 240 employees, she said, at Sterling Energy. The majority of them are good people, hard-working people, people who believe in what we're building. And I've been running this company for 8 years, and I've built a lot of things I'm proud of. She paused. But I have been sitting across conference tables from men like the ones in that restaurant for 8 years, and I have learned to negotiate, and to fight, and to protect what I've built, and I am good at all of those things. Another pause. Longer. What I have never figured out how to build inside the company is what I watched you build in that restaurant in about 4 minutes. Ethan said nothing. You didn't organize those people, Victoria said. You didn't recruit them, or persuade them, or give them a reason. You just moved, and they moved with you. Because she searched for the word, came up empty, tried again, because you were real, because you were just a person who decided that the right thing was the right thing regardless of whether it was safe or convenient or smart. Her voice had changed. Not breaking, she was too controlled for that. But something underneath it was moving. I've been in rooms with some of the most powerful people in this country. I have never seen anyone do what you did on Saturday. Not without calculating it first. Ethan was quiet for a moment. I calculated it, he said. She blinked. Not for long, he said. Maybe 10 seconds. I saw what was happening. I saw that nobody was moving. I thought about whether I was going to be the person who moved or the person who looked away. And then I made a decision. He paused. The calculation wasn't complicated. It was just, what do I want my daughter to see her father do? Victoria looked at him for a long time. That's it, she said. That's it. She pressed her hand flat on the table. The same gesture from the restaurant door. He was starting to understand it was something she did when she was landing on something solid, grounding herself. I want to tell you something, she said, and I want you to hear it completely before you respond. Okay. I have been developing an initiative for the last 18 months. It started as a pilot program, internal, for Sterling Energy employees. Flexible scheduling, on-site childcare subsidy, career development tracks for workers who have non-traditional backgrounds or gaps in their work history. She was watching him as she said it. We're trying to expand it. Nationally. Partner with other companies, build out the framework, make it something that actually reaches people who need it, instead of just looking good in a press release. She paused. The problem is that everything we've built so far has been built by people like me, people who have resources and education and who are very good at designing systems for people we've never actually been. She paused. I need someone who has lived it, who knows what it actually looks like from inside it, what the real walls are, what actually helps, versus what just sounds like it would help. She held his gaze. I need an advisor. The word landed between them on the table. Ethan looked at her. You want a bus mechanic to advise your company, he said. Not skeptical, just precise. I want the man who raised a daughter alone for 4 years while working overtime and who still somehow has enough left in him to stand up for a stranger in a restaurant. Yes, that's exactly what I want. She didn't look away. Not charity, work, with a real title, real compensation, and the expectation that you will tell me when I'm wrong. Which I expect will be often. Ethan sat with that. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. Once, twice. Outside, another bus went by. I don't know anything about the energy industry, he said. I don't need you to know the energy industry. I have 240 people who know the energy industry. She leaned forward slightly. I need someone who knows what it looks like when a single parent is trying to hold everything with 2 jobs and no margin, and a kid counting on them. I need someone who can sit across the table from me and tell me whether the things we're building are actually useful or whether they're just designed by people who've read about the problem in a report. He was quiet. You'd be walking into a company in the middle of a legal fight, he said. Yes, those men aren't going to stop. No, they won't. And you want to expand a social initiative in the middle of that. Especially in the middle of that, she said. Because the thing they are trying to take from me is not my company. It's my ability to choose what my company stands for. Her jaw was set. Her hands were steady. I'm not letting them take that. Something moved in Ethan's chest. He recognized it. Hadn't felt it in a while. It was the feeling that came right before a decision. Not the decision itself, but the moment right before. The intake of breath. The arrival at the edge of something. The moment when you're either going to step or you're going to step back. He'd stepped once this weekend already. The habit, apparently, was catching. I need to think about it, he said. I know, she said immediately. Take the time you need. There's no pressure here, I mean that. She reached into her jacket and put a card on the table. Simple. Sterling Energy, her name, a direct number. Call me when you're ready. Or don't call me, and I'll understand that too. He picked up the card, turned it over, plain back. Nothing. He put it in his shirt pocket. One question, he said. Of course, Saturday. I came over to the table. He held her gaze. What were you thinking? In those first few seconds. She thought about it. Actually thought. Didn't reach for a polished answer. I thought you were going to make it worse, she said. I thought you were a well-meaning civilian who had no idea what he was walking into, and that the best I could do was keep things from escalating. She paused. And then you didn't escalate. You just stood there. And you were so steady. You were just so completely steady. She said it like the words surprised her even now. I've hired a lot of people. I've interviewed hundreds. I can tell, usually within a few minutes, what a person is made of, what they're like under pressure. She looked at him directly. I have never seen anyone stand that steady. Ethan thought about 2 deployments and a hospital corridor at 2 in the morning and 4 years of 4:45 alarm clocks. He thought about what steadiness actually cost, what it was made of. It wasn't the absence of shaking, it was what you built around the shaking, so that the shaking didn't show. But he didn't say any of that. I had a good teacher, he said. Who? He thought about Claire. About Lily. About a specific afternoon when a 7-year-old had told him that feelings were like weather, and then gone back to her monkey bars. Daughter, he said. Victoria looked at him. And this time she didn't almost smile. She did smile fully, the unguarded one that changed her whole face, and she picked up her coffee and finally drank some of it. She sounds remarkable, Victoria said. She really is, Ethan said. He left 2 minutes before his 30 minutes were up. That was enough time to walk back to the yard, wash his hands, and get back under the bus he'd on before the Dinan shift started. He thought about the conversation, the whole walk back. He thought about what it would mean. Not the money, though the money would matter. He understood that clearly and without embarrassment. Understood that financial pressure was real and concrete, and not something to wave away with sentiment. It would matter. But he was thinking beyond the money. Thinking about what it would mean to build something. Not fix something, he was good at fixing things, but to build something from the beginning. Something designed to solve a problem he actually knew in his body, not just his head. He thought about the single parents in his building. The woman on the 3rd floor who worked double shifts at the hospital and whose kids he'd seen at the bus stop alone more mornings than he'd wanted to count. The guy 2 doors down who'd lost his job 6 months ago and hadn't found his footing yet, and whose daughter was in Lily's class, and who had that specific look that Ethan recognized, the look of a man holding on by force of will, and not much else. He thought about what it would mean if something that actually worked could reach those people. He was still thinking about it at 4 o'clock when his shift ended. He was thinking about it in the car, on the way to pick up Lily from aftercare. He was thinking about it when she ran out the door and hurled herself at him with the full-body impact of a 7-year-old who had been containing her energy all afternoon and was done containing it. Dad, she said, from where she detached herself to his midsection. Guess what? What? My teacher said my solo was the best part. Of course she did. She said it with feeling. Your teacher has excellent judgment. Lily detached herself and fell into step beside him. Backpack bouncing, one shoe untied in the way that it was always one shoe untied. The same shoe, every single day, like the lace, had a personal preference for freedom. Dad, she said. Yeah, that lady from the restaurant. Are you going to see her again? He glanced down at her. Why do you ask? Lily shrugged. The elaborate shrug of someone who has a reason, but is deciding how much to reveal. She seemed like she needed a friend, she said finally. Not a restaurant friend, a real one. Ethan walked for a moment. He thought about Victoria Sterling sitting alone at a corner table, with a coffee she wasn't drinking and a phone face down on the table, and a legal fight that was going to get harder before it got easier, and a company she was trying to use as an instrument for something that actually mattered. He thought about the business card in his shirt pocket. He thought about a man who had stood up in a restaurant for 10 seconds worth of reasons, and then come back and found that the 10 seconds had changed the shape of everything. Maybe, he said. Lily nodded, like that was the right answer. Like she'd already known that was the answer. And just needed to hear him say it. Good, she said. She should have someone in her corner. He looked at his daughter, 7 years old. Still had the strawberry from yesterday's pancakes, or maybe today's. He'd have to ask somehow on her jacket sleeve. One shoe untied. Captain Flops visible through the mesh of her backpack. Dark eyes forward. Already thinking about the next thing, the way she always was. Already 3 steps ahead of whatever room she was in. He reached down and fixed the shoe. She held still while he tied it. Already used to this. Already somewhere else in her head. When he stood back up, she said, Dad, yeah. What are we having for dinner? And just like that, the world was ordinary again. Just a father and his daughter walking to the car in the late afternoon light, the day winding down, the city going about its business all around them. What do you want? He said. Tacos, she said immediately. No hesitation. This had clearly been decided some time ago. Tacos it is. He opened the car door for her. She climbed in. He went around to his side, started the engine, checked the mirrors. His hand went to his shirt pocket. The card was still there. He pulled out of the parking lot and headed toward the taco place on Federal that Lily had loved since she was 5. And he drove with one hand on the wheel and his mind running 2 tracks. Simultaneously, the ordinary track, the tacos and the homework, and the bedtime routine, and the alarm at 4:45. And the other track, the one that was still processing something that had started with a chair scraping back in a restaurant and hadn't finished yet. He didn't call Victoria Sterling that night. He thought about it. He sat at the kitchen table after Lily was in bed, and he thought about it for a long time. The card on the table in front of him, the house quiet around him. He thought about the risks. He thought about Lily. He thought about what it would mean to step into something bigger than fixing buses without a clear map of where it went. He thought about a 7-year-old who had asked him why everyone was pretending not to see. He left the card on the table and went to bed. But in the morning, when he got up at 4:44, 1 minute before the alarm, the first thing he did before the coffee, before the work clothes, before the check of Lily's backpack was pick up the card. He put it in his wallet, right behind the photograph of Claire that he'd carried there for 11 years. He didn't know. Standing in his quiet kitchen in the dark at 4:44 in the morning, that in 2 weeks Victoria Sterling would call him. That she'd call him, not to discuss the initiative, not to follow up on their lunch conversation, but because something had happened. Something that the 3 men had done or tried to do that was going to require Ethan to make a decision that was a great deal larger and more permanent than standing up in a restaurant. He didn't know. He just put the card in his wallet and went to make coffee and start the day. That was what you did. That was all you could ever do. You started the day. The card stayed in his wallet for 11 days. Ethan knew because he counted. Not obsessively, he wasn't built for obsession. Didn't have the bandwidth for it, but the way he counted everything. Quietly, in the background. The way a mechanic keeps track of mileage, even when he's not looking at the odometer. 11 days of 4:45 mornings, 11 days of bus engines and brake assemblies, and a rotating cast of problems that all had solutions if you were patient enough and honest enough about what was actually broken. 11 days of Lily's homework and Lily's dinner negotiations, and Lily's elaborate bedtime rituals that had somehow expanded over the years to include 3 specific stuffed animals arranged in a specific order, a glass of water that had to be room temperature, not cold, and exactly 7 minutes of conversation about whatever was on her mind before she was willing to close her eyes. He didn't mind the 7 minutes. He looked forward to them. They were the clearest part of his day. On the 4th day, she'd asked him, out of nowhere, mid-conversation about a disagreement she'd had with a classmate named Trevor, whether the restaurant lady was doing okay. "I think so," Ethan had said. "You should check," Lily said. "That's what you do. When you're worried about someone, you check." "I'm not worried," he said. She looked at him the way she sometimes looked at him, like she was being very patient with someone who was not quite keeping up. "Okay," she said, and moved back to the Trevor situation, which was ongoing and complex and involved disputed ownership of a colored pencil. He thought about the card that night, took it out of his wallet, set it on the nightstand, looked at it for about 30 seconds, put it back. On day 11, his phone rang at 6:47 in the morning. He was in the yard, coffee in hand, about to start his first inspection of the shift. He looked at the screen. Unknown number, Denver area code. "Same one as before," he answered on the second ring. "Mr. Brooks." It wasn't Dana this time. It was Victoria herself, and something in her voice told him immediately that the 11 days of relative quiet were over. Her voice was controlled. It was always controlled. But underneath the control, something was moving fast. The kind of fast that a person tries to hide and can't quite. "Victoria, here's what happened." A short silence. "How did you know something happened?" "You called before, 7 in the morning." Another silence, longer. "They went after my employees," she said. Ethan went still. "The SEC filing didn't hold," she said. "Our legal team dismantled it in 8 days, which I expected." What I didn't expect, her voice caught, just barely, just for a fraction of a second, so brief that if he hadn't been paying close attention, he would have missed it entirely. "They contacted 3 of my senior managers directly, individually, offered them positions at a competitor, above-market compensation, significant signing bonuses. The offer was contingent on providing internal documents, communications, financial projections." She paused. 2 of them said no immediately. The third one, she stopped. "The third one took the meeting," Ethan said. "The third one took the meeting," she confirmed. Flat, the flatness of someone who has already processed the betrayal and is now in the stage that comes after processing. The stage where you just carry it. Marcus Chen, 6 years with the company. I hired him personally. I trusted him. A beat. He didn't take the deal. He came to me instead. He told me about the meeting, everything they'd offered, everything they'd asked for. Another beat. But the fact that they approached him means they're escalating. They're not waiting for the legal process. They're going directly for the people. Ethan set down his coffee cup. "What do you need?" he said. The directness of it seemed to stop her for a moment. Like she'd prepared for a longer preamble. Like she'd expected to have to build up to the question. "I need to talk to someone who isn't a lawyer or a board member or an investor," she said. "I need to talk to someone who doesn't have a position in this." She paused. "I know that's not a small ask. Where are you?" "My office. Sterling Energy Headquarters, downtown Denver, 17th Street. He looked at his watch. 6:51. His shift started at 7. He had 3 buses on the inspection schedule and a compressor issue on one of the articulated units that waiting 2 days already. He thought about 2 things simultaneously and quickly. What Ron would say if he asked to come in late, and whether what Victoria was describing was the kind of thing that got worse if nobody moved quickly. He already knew the answer to both. "I can be there by 8:15, he said. "After I talk to my supervisor. I'll have someone meet you at the lobby," she said. And then, "Thank you, Ethan." It was the first time she'd used his first name, he noticed. He wasn't sure what to do with it, so he filed it the way he filed most things that required later processing, and he went to find Ron. Ron was a big man from Pueblo who had been with the RTD fleet for 22 years and who approached most problems with the philosophical equanimity of someone who had seen everything break down, at least twice. He listened to Ethan's request with his coffee cup, halfway to his mouth, and his expression doing very little. "Personal thing?" Ron said. "Yeah, Serious? Ethan considered the question with the precision it deserved. Getting that way. Ron drank his coffee, set the cup down. Weston can cover your first 2 inspections. The compressor thing that's yours when you get back, nobody else is going to touch it right. I appreciate it. You can buy me lunch Friday. Ron picked up his clipboard. Go do your personal thing, Brooks. Try not to make a habit of it. He was in the lobby of Sterling Energy headquarters at 8:12. The building was the kind that said money, without shouting about it. Clean lines, quality materials, the particular hum of an organization that was large enough to have its own gravitational field. Dana met him at the security desk. She was younger than he'd imagined from the phone call, early 30s, with the efficient movement of someone who was always managing 4 things at once and had made peace with that. She looked at his work clothes and didn't blink. He appreciated that. The elevator ride was 41 seconds, he counted. Victoria's office was on the 14th floor, and it was exactly what he would have predicted, and nothing like what he would have predicted simultaneously. The expected markers of executive space, clean desk, city view, the efficient layout of someone who worked rather than performed working. But there were also 2 framed children's drawings on the wall near the door. The kind that were clearly important enough to frame and hang in a place you'd see them every day. And a small clay pot on the windowsill that listed slightly to the left and had clearly been made by an amateur and kept for reasons that had nothing to do with aesthetics. She was on the phone when he came in. She held up one finger 1 minute, and he sat in the chair across from her desk and waited. He watched her on the phone. She was handling something he could tell from the cadence, even without hearing the other side, managing someone's alarm, walking someone down from a ledge. Her voice was calm and steady and authoritative, and she never once raised it, and when she hung up, she pressed both palms flat on the desk and took one controlled breath and looked at him. Board member, she said. Panic response to the news about Marcus's meeting. Understandable, Ethan said. Manageable, she said. The distinction was deliberate. How much do you know about hostile takeovers? Enough to know that the legal strategy is usually the secondary attack, he said. The primary one is people. You make people doubt. You make them afraid. Then you move in when they're already looking for a way out. She studied him. That's not something most mechanics know. That's something combat medics know, he said. Tactics are tactics. You go for the structure, and then you go for the will. Once the will goes, the structure falls on its own. She was quiet for a moment, processing. Then they're trying to isolate me. That's what this is. The SEC filing was noise, designed to make investors nervous and give the board a reason to question my judgment. The approach to my managers was about creating doubt internally, making my own people wonder if I can protect them. She paused. If it works, I don't have to be forced out. I just become someone that nobody wants to stand behind. And if it doesn't work, Ethan said, then they escalate again. She met his eyes. They always escalate. He sat with that. Outside, 14 floors down, Denver was going about its morning, with the complete indifference of a city that had other things on its mind. Tell me about Marcus, Ethan said. She looked slightly surprised by the direction. What about him? You said you hired him personally. 6 years. You trusted him. What kind of man is he? She thought about it. Really thought, not for show. Careful, she said finally. Smart. He doesn't speak until he's sure. When he does speak, it's worth listening to. She paused. He came to me the same day they approached him. He didn't wait. Didn't consult anyone else. Another pause. That tells you something about a person. It does, Ethan agreed. Have you told him that? She blinked. What? Have you told Marcus that the fact that he came to you the same day tells you something about who he is? Have you said that to him? She opened her mouth, closed it. The specific expression of someone realizing they've overlooked something obvious. No, she said. You should, Ethan said today, before anything else. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and sent a text. Fast, decisive, no hesitation. Done, she said. He almost smiled. Tell me about the other 2. The ones who said no immediately. Sarah Okonkwo, head of regulatory affairs. She's been with me 4 years. She texted me after she turned them down, didn't even call. Just texted, 3 words. Tried to flip me. Victoria's expression shifted. Something almost warm moved through it. Sarah has 2 kids. Single parent. She's been with us since the pilot childcare program launched. She stayed not because of the program, she was already here. But she told me once that the program changed what this job meant to her. She paused. The other one is David Park. He runs engineering. He called me immediately, before he'd even left the meeting location. He was still in the parking lot. So 2 out of 3 called you within hours, Ethan said. The third came to you same day. You don't have a loyalty problem. You have a targeting problem. They came after the people they thought were most vulnerable, most likely to be tempted. Marcus, she said. They knew about his situation. His mother is ill. The medical costs, she stopped. They offered a compensation package that was specifically designed around what they knew about his finances. Ethan's jaw tightened. Not visibly, he kept it internal, but the cold precision of that, the calculated weaponizing of a man's family crisis, moved through him like something dark. They did their homework, he said. They always do their homework, she said. That's what makes them effective. She looked at him directly. That's what makes them dangerous. He leaned forward, both elbows on his knees. The posture he used when he was about to say something he'd decided to say and was going to say completely. Victoria, what do you actually need from me right now? Not eventually, right now. She held his gaze for 3 full seconds. I need to know whether to fight or to protect, she said. Those aren't the same thing. Fighting means going public, making noise, turning this into a story that's bigger than the two of us. It means my employees are visible and potentially vulnerable while it plays out. Protecting means closing down, consolidating, keeping everything internal until the legal process finishes. She paused. Every advisor I have is telling me to protect. Keep quiet. Don't escalate. Wait. Another pause. Something is telling me they're wrong. What's telling you that? He said. The same thing that told you to stand up in that restaurant, she said. Quietly, directly. He was quiet for a moment. He thought about the restaurant, about what had actually happened, not the version that sounded clean in retrospect, but the real version. The 10 seconds of standing there, not knowing if anyone was going to move with him, or if he was going to be standing there, alone looking like an idiot, while 3 men in expensive suits explained to him what a mistake he'd made. In the restaurant, he said slowly, I didn't stand up because I had a strategy. I stood up because staying seated felt like a choice I'd already made, and I hadn't made it yet. He paused. The risk of going public isn't the noise. The noise is manageable. The risk is that it only works if the people around you hold. My people hold, she said, immediate. No hesitation. You sure about that? Sarah texted me 3 words, she said. David called from the parking lot. Marcus sat across from men who knew exactly what his mother's medical bills looked like, and he came straight to me. She leaned forward. Yes, I'm sure. He looked at her for a long moment. Then fight, he said. She breathed out. One long, controlled breath. The kind that releases something that's been held too tight for too long. I needed to hear someone say that who wasn't going to benefit from the fight, she said. I might benefit from the fight, he said. Depending on what you decide about the initiative. She looked at him. Something shifted in her expression, surprised. And then something past the surprise. Something that was maybe the beginning of the kind of trust that gets built between people who have been honest with each other under pressure. Speaking of which, she said. I haven't decided yet, he said. I know, but I want to show you something before you do. She stood up. Come with me. She walked him out of her office, past Dana's desk, down a hallway he hadn't seen yet, through a glass door into a conference room that had been set up differently than a standard conference room. No boardroom layout, chairs in a loose circle, whiteboards covered in handwriting, not presentation slides, coffee cups that had been there a while. The physical evidence of a working session rather than a presentation. Sitting in the room were 4 people. They all looked up when Ethan and Victoria walked in. This is Ethan Brooks, Victoria said simply. He's the man I told you about. I'd like you to tell him what you told me. Ethan looked around the circle. Sarah Okonkwo was on his left. He recognized the name but hadn't formed an image. She was compact, sharp-eyed, with the contained energy of someone who was always processing more than they were showing. She was in her late 30s and she was looking at Ethan with the direct, assessing gaze of someone who took exactly as much as she gave, and not 1 ounce more. David Park was next to her, Quieter in person than Ethan had imagined. Younger than his title suggested early 40s. Maybe with the careful stillness of an engineer who thought in systems. Marcus Chen was across the circle. He looked like a man who hadn't slept well in a week, which was a look Ethan was intimately familiar with. He had his hands wrapped around a coffee cup, and he was looking at Ethan with something that might have been the early stage of deciding whether to be embarrassed or not. The fourth person Ethan didn't recognize. A woman, late 60s, with white hair cut short and reading glasses on a beaded chain, and an expression of such absolute, settled calm that she seemed like the kind of person who had been through enough that very little had the power to surprise her anymore. Margaret O.C., Victoria said, our head of community partnerships, 23 years. The initiative was her idea originally. Margaret looked at Ethan. Sit down, she said. It was a warm instruction, not a sharp one. He sat. What happened in the next 40 minutes was not what he'd expected. He'd expected a presentation, numbers, a pitch, something designed to persuade him. What he got instead was 4 people talking about their lives. Sarah went first. She talked about the year after her divorce, when she had 2 kids under 5, and a job that required 60-hour weeks, and a childcare situation that cost more per month than her car payment, and her grocery bill combined. She talked about the specific mathematics of impossibility, the way you run the numbers over and over because you can't believe they're actually as bad as they are, and then you run them again, and they are. She talked about the morning she sat in her car in the parking lot of a daycare center and cried for 11 minutes because she'd had to turn down a promotion that would have solved half her problems. Because the promotion required travel, and the travel would have meant the childcare situation got worse, not better, and the mathematics of that was a trap with no exit. David talked about his brother. Not himself his brother, who'd raised his kids alone after his wife left, and who had worked construction, and then lost a finger in a job site accident, and then spent 8 months unable to work, and had almost lost his apartment, and had almost, in the way that the word almost sometimes means something worse than the thing it's supposed to soften, lost himself. David said it carefully. He didn't say what he meant by that. He didn't need to. Marcus didn't talk about his mother right away. He talked about the meeting. He described it in detail that was clearly costing him something to share the conference room. The 2 men, the compensation package printed on paper and slid across the table with the practiced smoothness of people who did this regularly. He talked about sitting there and doing the math, because the math was real, because his mother's medical bills were real, because the gap between what he made and what he needed was a real number, and not a small one. And then he talked about the moment he thought about his mother, not the Buddhisms, his mother, Elena Chen, 68 years old, who had come to America from Shanghai with $40 and a suitcase, and who had worked double shifts in a restaurant kitchen for 11 years so that Marcus could go to college, who had told him once, and only once because she was not a woman who repeated herself, that a man's name was the one thing that belonged entirely to him, and the one thing he could lose that could never be given back. I thought about her name, Marcus said, quietly, his hands tight around the coffee cup. She is Elena Chen. I am Marcus Chen. And if I walked out of that conference room, having agreed to what they were asking, I could not be Marcus Chen anymore. I could not look at my own name. He paused, so I called Victoria. The room was quiet. Ethan sat in the circle and felt the weight of what these 4 people had put in front of him. Not a strategy, not a pitch. 4 human beings and the specific gravity of their specific lives, laid out on the table not to persuade him, but to let him see what he was actually being asked to step into. He looked at Victoria. She was watching him. She hadn't said anything since the introductions. She'd let her people talk, and she'd watched Ethan listen. What would this look like, Ethan said. Actually. Not the brochure version. What would I actually be doing? Margaret answered before Victoria could. You'd be sitting in rooms like this one, she said. You'd be the person who says that sounds good in theory. But here's what actually happens. You'd be the person who tells us when we're building something for the version of the problem we understand, instead of the version of the problem that actually exists. She paused. And you'd be right more often than we would, which will irritate us. and we'd get over it. Something in that made him want to laugh. He held it. "The fight that's coming," he said to Victoria. "The public fight. That puts me in the story." "Yes," she said, "it does. I have a daughter. I know. I need to know that what I'm stepping into doesn't blow back on her." Victoria didn't answer immediately. That was the right response. A fast answer would have been a sales answer. The pause was the answer of someone who was actually thinking about the question, rather than closing the sale. "I can't promise you nothing ever touches her," Victoria said. "These men play dirty, and I won't lie to you about that." She held his gaze. "What I can promise you is that I will put resources behind protecting both of you. Real resources, not symbolic. And I can promise you that if it ever reaches a point where I believe the risk to her is real and serious, I will tell you immediately and I will support whatever decision you make." She paused, including the decision to walk away. "You'd lose your advisor," he said. "I'd rather lose my advisor than be the person who put a 7-year-old at risk," she said. Simply, without performance. That's not a negotiating position. That's just true. He sat with that. He looked at Marcus, who was looking back at him with the quiet recognition of one man who had sat across from a hard decision and made the call and was still living with the living of it. He looked at Sarah, who was watching him with the direct gaze of a woman who had done her own math 1,000 times and knew that there was no version of a good decision that didn't cost something. He looked at Margaret, who was looking at her coffee cup with the settled patience of someone who had learned to wait for the right moment rather than push at the wrong one. He looked at Victoria. He thought about the card in his wallet behind Claire's photograph. He thought about a woman who had pressed her hand against a restaurant door and steadied herself and kept going. He thought about Lily at the kitchen table, doing her homework, about the woman on the 3rd floor, working double shifts, about David's brother, sitting in an apartment trying to hold on, about Marcus Chen and his mother's name. He thought about a 7-year-old who had asked why everyone was pretending not to see. "I have one condition," he said. Victoria leaned forward slightly. "Tell me." "The program, when it rolls out, when it goes national, you build in a specific track for workers in the trades. Mechanics, construction, manufacturing. Not just office workers or service industry. The people who work with their hands and who disappear from every program like this, because nobody thinks to include them." He held her gaze. "Those are my people. They need this as much as anyone." Victoria looked at Margaret. Something passed between them. "It's already in the framework," Margaret said quietly. "Page 14. Ethan blinked. "Victoria told us about you," Margaret said. "Not specifically. But she described the kind of person she wanted in this chair. And we built what we would need for that person." She paused. "We were hoping you were the right fit." He sat with that for a moment. Then he looked at Victoria. "I'm in," he said. She didn't celebrate. She didn't smile, or make a noise, or do any of the things people did in movies when the moment arrived. She just looked at him steadily and said, "Good," and pressed her palms flat on the table. That was it. That was the whole moment, and somehow that was exactly right. He was back at the RTD yard by 11:40. He found his coffee where he'd left it, cold now, and poured it out and got a fresh cup and pulled the work order for the compressor problem on the articulated bus and got underneath it and started working. Ron stopped by at noon, looked at Ethan's feet sticking out from under the bus, and said, "Personal thing resolved." "Working on it," Ethan said from under the bus. Ron grunted. "Lunch is on you Friday." "Fair enough," Ethan said. He lay under the bus and worked, and let the familiar physical rhythm of it settle him. The smell of oil and metal, the precise language of a machine that told you exactly what was wrong if you knew how to listen. The specific satisfaction of locating the problem and understanding it and knowing, with certainty, what it would take to fix it. He thought about Victoria's boardroom, about Marcus Chen's mother's name, about Sarah in the parking lot crying for 11 minutes because the math didn't work. He thought about the compressor. Both things were true simultaneously. Both things mattered. The large and the immediate, the enormous and the ordinary, the work that changed the shape of things and the work that kept the buses running so that people could get where they needed to go. He was under the bus for 2 hours. When he came out, he had the problem solved. He washed his hands. He drank his coffee. He called Dana to confirm the paperwork would be ready by end of week. And then he picked up Lily from aftercare at 4 o'clock, and she ran out the door and hit him full force the way she always did. And he caught her and swung her up the way he always did. And she said, "Dad, Trevor gave me the pencil back." And he said, "Of course he did." And she said, "He said sorry." And he said, "That was the right call on his part." And she said, "I know." And he put her down and she fell into step beside him, one shoe already working on becoming untied. "Dad," she said. "Yeah, are you okay?" He looked down at her. The question was simple. She asked it the way she asked most things, directly, without strategy, just the genuine and open wanting to know. He thought about the day. The phone call at 6:47. The elevator 41 seconds. The circle of chairs and 4 people and the weight of what they'd said. The one condition and the answer that was already on page 14. He thought about the card in his wallet. He thought about what came next. "Yeah, Bug," he said. She nodded, looked ahead. "Good," she said. "Because I need help with the math homework, and it's the hard kind." "The hard kind," he said. "Fractions," she said, with the gravity of someone naming a natural disaster. He laughed, genuine, from somewhere real. "Let's go home," he said. She took his hand. They walked to the car. The afternoon sun was doing what Denver afternoon sun did in October, cutting low and golden across everything, turning the ordinary world into something that looked, briefly, like it had been lit for a reason. He opened the car door. She climbed in. He went around to his side. He started the engine. He checked the mirrors. His wallet was in his back pocket. The card was in his wallet, behind Claire's photograph. He pulled out of the lot. He didn't know yet what the fight was going to look like. He didn't know which direction the men in expensive suits were going to move next, or how loud it was going to get, or what it was going to ask of him that he hadn't yet anticipated. He didn't know how far the story was going to travel before it was finished. He only knew what he'd always known. You started the day. You showed up. You fixed what was broken. And when the moment came, when it came quietly or loud, when it came in a restaurant or a boardroom or a parking lot or a kitchen, at 4:44 in the morning, you stood up. You stood up, and you didn't look back. The story broke on a Thursday. Ethan found out the way he found out most things that happened outside the RTD yard, his phone buzzing in his chest pocket while he was elbow deep in a fuel line diagnosis. 3 buzzes in a row, which was the pattern he'd set for anything that needed immediate attention versus anything that could wait. He slid out, wiped his hands, looked at the screen. 3 texts from a number he didn't recognize. Then 1 from Victoria. Then 1 from Dana. Then 2 from a number he really didn't recognize that turned out, when he read the messages, to be a reporter from the Denver Post. He stood in the yard in the October cold and read Victoria's text first. It said, "It's out. They leaked it themselves. Call me when you can." He called her in 60 seconds. She picked up on the first ring. "They filed an amended complaint with the SEC this morning," she said, before he could speak. "And then they leaked it to 3 financial publications simultaneously. The story is framed as a corporate governance failure. They're positioning themselves as whistleblowers. A beat. They are suggesting that the initiative, our program, is a PR cover for irregular compensation practices." Ethan absorbed that. "They're using the program as the attack vector." "Yes," she said, "which means they did their homework, and they found the one thing most likely to—" She stopped, recalibrated. "The one thing most likely to make me hesitate, because I care about what we've built and they know it." "Are you hesitating?" he said. A silence, 3 seconds. 4. "No," she said, "but I needed to tell you before you read it somewhere else, because your name is in the story." He went very still. "My name," he said. "They describe you as an unqualified outside hire with no relevant industry experience, brought in as part of an irregular compensation arrangement following a personal encounter with the CEO." She said it, precisely, clinically, the way she'd probably been repeating it in her head all morning to sound the edges of it. They used the word optics 4 times. He turned the phone in his hand, looked across the yard. Ron was watching him from 40 feet away, with the specific look of a man who could tell something significant had just happened and was giving Ethan the space to process it. "Ethan," Victoria said, "I need you to know that I will completely understand if you want to step back from this. What they're doing now is personal. Your name, your family. What's the countermove? He said. Another silence. Different quality than the first one. We go fully public, she said. Not just a press statement. We put the program in front of people. Real people. The participants, the outcomes, the actual story of what it does and who it serves. We stop letting them define the narrative and we define it ourselves. She paused. It means you'd have to speak, publicly, your story, your perspective. Not as a spokesperson as yourself. He thought about himself standing in front of a camera, speaking to a room, being looked at by people who didn't know him, and were being invited to form an opinion about him, based on a description written by people who wanted him to look like a problem. He thought about Lily. He thought about the woman on the third floor, working double shifts, David's brother in the apartment, Marcus Chen and his mother's name. He thought about a room full of strangers who had stood up in a restaurant because one person moved first. Set it up, he said. He heard her exhale. Okay, she said. Okay, Friday. I'll have Dana coordinate everything. There will be media, I won't pretend otherwise. And it will be loud for a while before it settles. I know, he said. Are you sure? I've been sure before when I probably shouldn't have been, he said. But yeah, I'm sure. He hung up, looked at Ron, who was still watching. I'm going to need Friday morning, Ethan said. Ron looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked down at his clipboard. Then back up. This the same personal thing, he said. Evolved version, Ethan said. Ron wrote something on his clipboard. Thursday you stay 2 hours late and cover the articulated units. Done, Ethan said. And you're buying lunch every Friday for the next month. That's steep, Ethan said. That's the market rate for covering a man's personal evolution, Ron said, and walked away. Ethan went back under the fuel line. He worked for 4 more hours without stopping. The work was the thing that kept everything calibrated. The work was honest. The bus either ran or it didn't. The problem either existed or it didn't. The fix either held or it didn't. There was no spin in a fuel line, no narrative management in a brake assembly. He needed that, especially today. He picked up Lily at 4. She got in the car and looked at his face and said, "What happened?" "Long day," he said. She studied him with those eyes. The restaurant lady kind of long day, or the regular kind? He glanced at her. "How do you know about those 2 categories?" "Because you have 2 different faces," she said patiently. "The regular tired face and the other one." She paused. "You have the other one." He drove for a moment, thinking about how to say what needed to be said. He'd been thinking about it all afternoon. How you explain something like this to a 7-year-old without either lying to her or frightening her. He'd decided on the truth. He always decided on the truth with Lily. It was the only approach that had ever worked, and it was the only approach she ever let him get away with. "Some people wrote something about me in the news," he said. "It's not totally accurate. But it's going to be something people see." She was quiet for a moment. "Did you do something wrong?" she said. "No," he said. "Then why does it matter what they wrote?" He looked at her briefly, looked back at the road. "Because what people read shapes what they think," he said. "And what people think shapes what they do. And sometimes people act on wrong information, and it causes problems before the right information catches up." She processed that. He could almost hear the gears. "So you have to fix it," she said. "Yeah," he said. "I have to fix it." "How?" "By telling the truth in a place where people can hear it," he said. She nodded. One firm nod. The nod of someone for whom this was a satisfying and sufficient answer. "Okay," she said. "Can we have spaghetti tonight?" He laughed. "From the real place. The one that Lily could always reach when nothing else could." "Yeah," he said. "We can have spaghetti." Thursday night, he sat at the kitchen table after Lily was in bed, and he read everything. Every article, every comment thread, every piece of the narrative they'd built around him. He read it carefully and without flinching, the way he'd been trained to assess a situation completely, without the filter of what he wanted to be true. It was calculated. He could see the architecture of it clearly. Every word chosen to suggest rather than state, to imply rather than accuse, to use language that created impressions, while being careful never to make claims that could be directly refuted. He was described as having a personal relationship with Victoria Sterling. The word personal was used 3 times in one paragraph, each time positioned adjacent to the word financial, and the proximity was not accidental. He set his phone down. He looked at Claire's photograph on the refrigerator. The one from the camping trip, the one where she was laughing with her head thrown back and her hair going sideways in the wind. He'd never once asked himself what Claire would think of a decision he'd already made. That felt like cheating, like using her as a rubber stamp. But sometimes he asked himself what she would see that he was missing. Claire had always seen things he missed. That was one of her gifts, not that she was smarter, but that she looked at things from angles he didn't naturally occupy. He thought about what she would see right now. He thought she'd see a man who was scared, not of the men in expensive suits. They'd been scarier when they were in the restaurant. When the threat was physical and immediate, and the stakes were Lily, sitting 3 booths away. She'd see a man who was scared of something more specific and more personal than that. Scared of being seen, scared of being public, scared of the permanent exposure that came with being someone whose name was in newspapers and whose story was being told by people who didn't know him. That. And then she'd probably see something like, "You've been invisible for 4 years, Ethan. You think that's been free? You think disappearing didn't cost something?" He picked up his phone, looked at it. Then he opened his texts and sent Lily's school a message, requesting a half-day absence for Friday morning. Administrative purposes, he wrote, which was technically not false. He went to bed. He did not sleep for 3 minutes after lying down. He slept for 8. The event Victoria had organized was not what he'd imagined. He'd imagined something formal. Podiums, cameras, the structured choreography of a press conference. What he walked into at 9:15 Friday morning was a conference room on the 2nd floor of a community center in 5 Points, and it was full of people. Not press, people. There were 43 of them, he counted automatically. Men and women, mostly in their 30s and 40s, mostly in the kind of clothes that said they'd come from work or were going to work after this. Some of them had kids with them, small children on laps, a toddler, walking a determined loop between the chairs. 3 cameras from local news stations were set up at the back of the room, unobtrusive, not the focus. The focus was the people. Victoria was already there, standing near the front, talking quietly with Margaret. She saw him come in and cross the room to him. "Thank you for being here," she said. "Who are all these people?" he said. "Program participants," she said. "Current and former. They heard what was being said about the initiative, and they asked to come." She paused. "I did not invite them. Margaret told me about it this morning." He looked at Margaret, who was across the room, talking to a woman holding a toddler on her hip. "They came on their own," he said. "They came on their own," Victoria confirmed. He stood with that for a moment. 43 people who had gotten up on a Friday morning and come to a community center in 5 Points because something they believed in was being described as a cover story. He thought about the restaurant, about the first chair scraping back, about how it had only taken one person moving before other people moved. He thought, it works both ways. It works in all directions. You show up for people, and sometimes, not always, not guaranteed, but sometimes they show up back. Marcus Chen found him near the coffee table. He looked better than he had on Tuesday. Still tired, but differently tired. Tired. The tired of someone who had made a hard decision and was now living on the other side of it, rather than the tired of someone still holding the decision in their hands. "I want to apologize," Marcus said, quiet and direct. "For what?" Ethan said. "For the fact that you're in this," Marcus said. "If I had come to Victoria sooner, the moment they reached out, before the meeting." "Stop," Ethan said. Not harsh, just clear. "You came to her the same day. You came with everything. That's what matters." Marcus looked at him, something working behind his eyes. "My mother called me last night," he said. Ethan waited. "I told her what was happening. The meeting, what they offered, what I did." He paused. She was quiet for a long time. And then she said in Mandarin, she switches. "When it's important," she said, "that a man's name is the one thing he takes with him when everything else is gone." His jaw moved. She said, "She was glad I still had mine." Ethan looked at Marcus Chen and felt the specific weight of that. The weight of a mother's verdict. The particular and irreplaceable relief of not having disappointed the person whose opinion you could not survive disappointing. She sounds like a remarkable woman, Ethan said. She is, Marcus said. She worked double shifts for 11 years so I could go to college. He paused. I thought about that when I was sitting across from those men. I thought, whatever I decide in the next 5 minutes, she has to be able to look at it. Ethan nodded. She can, he said simply. Marcus nodded back. They stood together for a moment, two men in a community center in 5 Points, drinking mediocre coffee, not needing to say anything else. Sarah Okonkwo appeared at Ethan's elbow. She was holding a coffee cup and had the brisk forward energy of someone with a specific agenda. I want to go first, she said, when they opened the floor. I want to go first. It's not my call, Ethan said. No, but you're the one speaking, she said. And I want you to know that you won't be standing up there alone. She held his gaze. I watched the tape from the restaurant. He blinked. What tape? Someone's phone video, a customer. It went up on social media Wednesday night. You didn't know? He hadn't known. He'd been under buses. It's been shared about 40,000 times in 48 hours, Sarah said, watching his face. The three men. The restaurant. You walking across the room, she paused. People are sharing it with 2 words in the caption. What 2 words, he said. She looked at him steadily. Stand up, she said. He set down his coffee cup. He stood in a community center in Denver and felt something move through him that he didn't have an immediate name for. It was too large for pride, and too quiet for shock, and too real for either of those categories to fully contain it. He thought about 10 seconds of decision-making. In a restaurant. He thought about Lily, asking why everyone was pretending not to see. He thought about a chair scraping back and the sound of it in a silent room. He thought about 40,000 people who had looked at a phone video and felt something move in their chest. Victoria touched his arm briefly. It's time, she said. He walked to the front of the room. He stood there and looked at 43 people and 3 cameras and felt the full weight of being seen in a way he hadn't been seen in 4 years, maybe longer. He was not a performer. He had no prepared remarks. He had thought about what he wanted to say, but he had not written it down, because the things you write down become performances, and the things you say from the actual place inside you are something different. He took one breath. I'm Ethan Brooks, he said. I'm a bus mechanic. I work for RTD, Denver Fleet Maintenance. I've been doing this for 6 years. Before that, I was an Army combat medic. Before that, I was a husband. He paused. I've been a father for 7 years, and a single father for 4. My daughter's name is Lily. She's 7. She plays the recorder, and she has opinions about everything, and she is the reason I do anything that matters. The room was completely quiet. I don't have an MBA, he said. I don't have a background in energy policy or corporate governance, or whatever language is currently being used to suggest that I don't belong in the room I'm standing in. He held the room's attention without performing, without trying. What I have is 11 years of getting up at 4:45 in the morning and figuring out how to keep everything moving with what I've got. What I have is the specific knowledge of what it looks like when a person is working 2 jobs and still can't close the gap. What I have is the lived experience of being exactly the kind of person that programs like this one are supposed to reach. He paused. That's what I bring to this work. You can decide whether it's enough. He looked at the room, at the 43 faces. I also want to say something about what's being written, he said, because some of you have probably seen it. And I want to be clear about one thing. I walked across a restaurant 6 weeks ago because my daughter asked me a question. She asked why everyone was pretending not to see something that was happening right in front of them. And I realized I was one of the people pretending. He stopped. I don't know how to do that. I've tried. I'm not built for it. So I stood up. And Victoria Sterling thanked me for it, and she told me what she was building, and I said yes. He let that sit for a moment. That's the whole story. There's no other story, and I'm not going to apologize for it. The room was quiet for 2 full seconds. Then Sarah Okonkwo stood up. She didn't ask for the floor, she just stood. My name is Sarah Okonkwo, she said. I've been with Sterling Energy for 4 years. Before the childcare program, I turned down a promotion because I couldn't fake math work with 2 kids under 5. After the program, I took a different promotion, and I am now the head of regulatory affairs for a company that I believe in. She paused. I'm standing up. Because I want anyone watching this to understand what we're actually talking about. We're not talking about optics. We're talking about whether people like me can do the work we're capable of doing. She sat back down. David Park stood up immediately after. David Park, head of engineering. My brother almost lost everything trying to raise his kids alone. Programs like this one exist to make sure that doesn't keep happening to people who are already working as hard as they can. He sat. Then a woman Ethan didn't know stood up, middle of the room. She was in her early 40s, work clothes, a child on her hip who was very interested in the zipper on her jacket. I'm Renee Williams, she said. I'm not employed by Sterling Energy. I'm a participant in the community pilot program they ran last year. Before the program, I was working 3 part-time jobs because none of them offered stable hours. The program connected me with job placement support and covered my daughter's daycare for 8 months while I got certified as an HVAC technician. She paused. I have 1 job now, full-time, benefits. She looked directly at the cameras in the back of the room. You tell me if that's a PR cover. She sat down. Another person stood. Then another. Then 3 at once. And the room sorted itself out, so they went one at a time, and Ethan stood at the front and watched it happen, and felt the weight of it building. Not the weight that pressed down, but the weight that lifts, the specific gravity of people telling the truth in a room together, and the truth being larger and more real than whatever had been constructed to replace it. 14 people spoke. The cameras ran the whole time. Victoria stood to his left and did not say a single word. When it was over, and the cameras were packing up, and people were getting coffee and talking to each other in the particular way that people talk when they've done something together that mattered, Victoria turned to Ethan and said, "Thank you. They did that," he said. "Because you made it possible for them to," she said. He didn't argue with her. It wasn't the moment for arguing. He just stood there and let the room do what it was doing and felt, for the first time in a long time, something that was not exactly peace. Peace was too quiet, too static, but something adjacent to it. Something that felt like being in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing, which was a feeling he'd chased for a long time without knowing what to call it. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. A text from Lily's teacher. His heart seized for a half-second the automatic parental alarm, but the message was ordinary. Lily had asked to do her show and tell about the restaurant video. Her teacher was asking if that was okay. He stared at the text. He typed back, "That's okay." Yes, he put the phone in his pocket. He found Margaret near the door, pulling on her coat. She was one of those people who could move through a crowd without effort. Not because she was small, but because she moved with a particular quality of intention that made space for itself. "Page 14, he said. She looked up. Her reading glasses were on the beaded chain. Her eyes were sharp. "I read the whole framework last night," he said. "The trades track. What you've built," he paused. "It's better than what I would have asked for. It's a start," she said. "You'll tell us what's missing." "I will," he said. She buttoned the top button of her coat, looked at him with the settled directness of 23 years of building things that mattered and watching some of them work and some of them fail, and learning to tell the difference. "You know what the hardest part of this work is," she said. "Tell me," he said. "Convincing people that what they've lived through is valuable. That experience isn't something you overcome on the way to expertise. It is the expertise." She paused. "Most people who've had the life you've had spend a tremendous amount of energy trying to make sure nobody sees it, trying to look like someone who hasn't struggled." She studied him. "You walked into that conference room in your work clothes, and you sat down, and you told the truth about who you were. Do you understand how rare that is?" He thought about the work clothes. He'd thought about changing. Had stood in his bedroom that morning for about 30 seconds holding his one collared shirt. Then he'd put the collared shirt back. "It's what I've got," he said. "It's what we needed," she said. She patted his arm once briefly, the pat of someone who did not distribute that kind of gesture casually, and walked out. The story ran that evening, all 3 local stations. The Denver Post published a follow-up by 10 o'clock that night. By Saturday morning, the restaurant video and the community center footage were running together on social media, paired the way narratives find each other when they're part of the same story. By Sunday, a national outlet had picked it up. The headline on the national piece was, "Stand Up." The story of a bus mechanic, a CEO, and a room that changed. Ethan read it at his kitchen table at 6 in the morning with his coffee, and he read it the same way he'd read the critical piece completely, without the filter of what he wanted to be true. He read it and found it mostly accurate, somewhat simplified, the way stories get simplified when they travel. The edges smoothed, the complexity reduced, the human mess of it made slightly more linear than it actually was. He could live with that. The legal fight continued for 4 more months. The 3 men did not disappear. They adapted, they filed again. They tried 2 more angles that Victoria's legal team handled with the efficient competence of people who had been anticipating the moves. Marcus Chen testified. Sarah Okonkwo provided documentation. David Park sat in a deposition room for 6 hours and answered every question with the precision of an engineer who had thought about his answers before he spoke. The amended SEC complaint was dismissed in February. The merger that Victoria had been protecting, the one that could change the energy industry, the one those 3 men in a restaurant had tried to force her to surrender, closed in March. The terms were hers. The initiative launched nationally in April. Ethan was there for the launch event. Not on a stage, he'd made that clear from the beginning. He was not a stage person. He was not built for stages, but in the room, sitting in a circle of chairs with 12 other people who were the advisory foundation of the program. Mechanics, nurses, construction workers, teachers, a long-haul trucker who had raised 3 kids while driving coast to coast and who had opinions about flexible scheduling that were specific, practical, and entirely correct. He looked around the circle and thought about a restaurant in Denver 6 months ago. He thought about the sound of a chair scraping back. He thought about how one sound in a quiet room could start something that kept moving long after the moment was over. Victoria spoke at the launch. She was precise and clear and compelling in the way she always was, and she talked about the program and the framework and the partnerships and the vision for what it could become. And she said all the right things. And when she was done, she looked at Ethan across the circle, and she said simply, "None of this exists without a man who stood up when everyone else was sitting down. I want everyone in this room to know that." He looked at the table. He was not a man who knew what to do with that kind of statement in a public setting, but he let it land. He let it be true. That evening, he picked up Lily from school. She ran out the door. Full body impact. He caught her. "Dad," she said from where she'd attached herself to his chest. "Guess what? What? My show and tell was the best one." "Of course it was." She pulled back, looked at him. "I showed the video of you walking across the restaurant. And then I told everyone that you were scared. But you did it anyway." She paused. "And then Trevor cried." He blinked. "Trevor cried." "He said it was very moving," Lily said seriously. "I think he was embarrassed. But I didn't say anything, because Miss Patterson says, feelings are like weather." He looked at his daughter. 7 years old, dark eyes, one shoe untied, Captain Flops visible through the mesh of her backpack, a smear of something purple on her left sleeve that he chose not to investigate. He looked at her and felt the weight, the warm, heavy, pressing weight of it. The specific and almost unbearable love that has no bottom and no ceiling and fills every available space in a person's chest. He reached down and fixed her shoe. She stood still while he did it. When he straightened up, she put her hand in his. They walked to the car. The late afternoon sun was doing what it did. The city was going about its business. The world was moving the way the world moves indifferently, continuously, carrying its million ordinary lives forward all at once. He opened her door. She climbed in. He went around to his side. He sat for a moment before starting the engine. Not for any particular reason. Not processing. Not calculating. Not doing any of the things he usually did in the quiet of the car. Just sitting. He thought about Claire briefly, the way he did every day. The photograph in his wallet. The hash browns. The particular way she said Lily's name with the extra breath at the end. He carried her the way he'd always carried her. Not as a wound, not as an absence, but as a presence that had changed the shape of the man he was, and therefore never entirely left. He thought about a restaurant on Colfax Avenue, a chair scraping back, a 7-year-old who had asked a question that couldn't be unasked. He thought about 43 people standing up in a community center, in 5 points. He thought about Marcus Chen and his mother's name, Sarah in the parking lot, David's brother holding on, Renee Williams and one full-time job with benefits. 12 people in a circle who knew from the inside what the program was being built to fix. He thought about the 1,000 families that the program had already reached in its pilot phase, and the 10,000 it was projected to reach by the end of the year, and the number after that, which was still just a number on a spreadsheet, but would eventually be a person standing somewhere in a parking lot, in a kitchen at 4 in the morning, in the back seat of a car, who had a little more margin than they'd had before, a little more room, a little more of what you needed to keep going, without losing the thing that made the going worth it. He thought about the cost of a chair scraping back. 0. It cost nothing. It was just a sound in a room. It was just a man who decided. He started the engine. "Dad," Lily said. "Yeah, what are we having for dinner?" He pulled out of the lot and headed toward the ordinary world, toward tacos, or spaghetti, or whatever she'd decided before he could weigh in, and he drove with one hand on the wheel and everything that mattered in the seat beside him. And the city moved around them the way cities do, and the light was doing what light does in Denver in the late afternoon, cutting low and golden and briefly making the world look like it was lit for a reason. He didn't know what was coming next. He never knew what was coming next. That was the condition of being alive. And he had stopped fighting it around the time he'd started getting up at 4:44 without an alarm. But he knew what he'd done. He knew what it had become. And he knew that somewhere in the country right now, in a break room, in a parking lot, in a community center folding chair, someone was reading a headline, or watching a video, or hearing a story, and feeling something move in their chest, feeling the specific and unfamiliar weight of believing that ordinary people could do something real. Not heroes, not the loudest or the richest or the most powerful, just people who looked at what was happening and decided that staying seated was a choice they hadn't made yet. Just people who stood up. Ethan Brooks had never set out to be a story. He'd set out to have lunch with his daughter before her concert. But the world has a way of handing you moments that are larger than your plans for the afternoon. And the only question that ever matters in those moments is the same question his 7-year-old had been asking him every day of her life without knowing she was asking it. What are you going to do when everyone else is pretending not to see? He'd given his answer. He'd given it in a restaurant on a Saturday afternoon, in work clothes, with cold coffee on the table, and a daughter watching from 3 booths away. And the answer, it turned out, was enough. It had always been enough. All it ever took was one person willing to stand up first.